The call came just after 8 p.m., interrupting the quiet hum of the dishwasher and the soft murmur of the television playing in the background. I had been folding laundry in the living room, trying to enjoy the rare moment of stillness in our usually chaotic household. Our daughter, Lily, was curled up on the couch beside me, half asleep with her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched in her small hands. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and after the long day I'd had, I wasn't in the mood for telemarketers or spam calls. But some deep, inexplicable instinct, made me pick up. "Mrs. Bennett?" The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. "This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your husband has been brought into the ER. You need to come immediately." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. My husband, James, was one of the healthiest people I knew. He went for runs in the morning, never skipped his checkups, and rarely even caught a cold. This had to be a mistake. What happened? My voice was barely above a whisper. He collapsed at work. He was unconscious when they brought him in. That's all I can tell you over the phone. You need to come right away. The world tilted slightly as I reached out to steady myself on the edge of the couch. Lily stirred beside me, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong, Mommy?" she asked sleepily. I forced a smile that I didn't feel. "Daddy's not feeling well. We need to go see him at the hospital." I grabbed my purse with shaking hands, threw on my coat, and gently lifted Lily into my arms. The drive to the hospital was a blur, the streetlights stretching into endless streaks of white and yellow. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands trembled against the steering wheel. James. My James. He had kissed me goodbye that morning, just like he always did. He had smiled at me over breakfast, stolen a sip of my coffee, and teased Lily about her mismatched socks. How could everything change in just a few hours? By the time we reached the hospital, my stomach was in knots. I carried Lily inside, clutching her a little too tightly, needing the comfort of her small, warm body against mine. The ER smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Nurses bustled around in pale blue scrubs, their faces impassive, moving with efficiency that only came from routine exposure to crisis. I barely had to say James's name before a nurse was leading me down the hall. My heart clenched at the sight of him lying on the hospital bed, tubes and wires attached to him, his face unnaturally pale against the crisp white sheets. "Oh my God," I whispered, stepping forward. "James?" His eyes fluttered open at the sound of my voice, and for a brief moment, relief flooded my chest. He was awake. He was alive. "Mrs. Bennett," a doctor said, stepping beside me. "Your husband suffered a sudden cardiac episode. We're running tests now to determine the cause, but he's stable for the moment." A cardiac episode? James was only 42. That didn't make sense. I turned back to James, gripping his hand. "Baby, what happened?" He tried to speak, but his voice was weak, strained. He swallowed, his throat bobbing. "I don't know." Before I could press for more details, a tiny voice spoke up beside me. "Is this because of the man who was yelling at Daddy today?" My breath caught. Slowly, I turned to look at Lily. Her wide, innocent eyes met mine, and she blinked as if confused by my reaction. "What man, sweetheart?" I asked carefully. She tilted her head, frowning in thought. "The man who came to our house today. He was really mad. He said Daddy needed to tell the truth before it was too late." A strange, suffocating silence fell over the room. My hands went cold. "Lily," I whispered, gripping her shoulders, "what are you talking about?" She hesitated, her small fingers playing with the hem of her dress. "He said Daddy was a liar." The air in my lungs turned to stone. James squeezed my hand weakly, his grip barely there. His lips parted, but no words came out. His face, already pale, drained of what little color it had left. I turned back to him, my pulse pounding in my ears. James, I said, my voice unsteady, what is she talking about? But he only closed his eyes, as if too exhausted, or too afraid, to answer. And in that moment, I realized something with chilling certainty. Whatever had put my husband in this hospital bed wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a secret. A secret that someone was willing to confront him about. And I had a terrifying feeling that this was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. James had been moved to a private room after they stabilized him, the steady beeping of the heart monitor punctuating the silence like an ominous metronome. I sat beside his bed, gripping his hand even though he wasn't conscious. The weight of Lily's words echoed in my mind, refusing to be silenced by logic or denial. The man who came to our house today, he said Daddy needed to tell the truth before it was too late. What truth? I kept replaying it over and over, searching for meaning, for some innocent explanation that would dissolve the dread growing in my chest. But every possibility I considered only led me back to the same place. James was hiding something from me. By morning, he was awake again, though groggy from the medication. The doctor explained that he had suffered from stress-induced cardiac arrhythmia. It wasn't a full heart attack, but it was serious enough to warrant monitoring and further tests. Stress. That word stuck with me like a splinter under my skin. What had James been so stressed about? He'd never mentioned anything unusual at work. His job as a regional manager for a logistics company wasn't exactly life or death. He always claimed things were fine. Normal. Stable. But clearly, they weren't. Lily had fallen asleep in a chair beside me, her small body curled up with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. I brushed her hair back gently, then turned to James. We need to talk. His eyes flicked to mine, shadowed with something I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Guilt? What did Lily mean? I asked softly, careful not to wake her. About the man who came to the house. James's jaw tightened. His hand twitched slightly under the blanket. I don't know what she's talking about, he muttered, his voice hoarse. I stared at him, waiting. That was it? That was his answer? She's 6, James. She doesn't make things like that up. She said there was a man at our house, someone angry with you. Someone who called you a liar. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, as if the conversation itself was exhausting. Maybe she misunderstood. Kids, they imagine things. I felt the first ember of anger ignite in my chest. Don't do that, I snapped quietly. Don't gaslight me. Or her. You know exactly what she's talking about. James's eyes opened again, dark and unreadable. For a brief second, I thought he might tell me. But then he looked away, staring at the sterile white ceiling tiles instead. I'm too tired for this, he whispered. I sat back in the chair, crossing my arms tightly over my chest, as if holding myself together physically could prevent the emotional unraveling already starting inside me. Fine, I said quietly. Rest. But when you're ready, we're going to have this conversation. Because the thing about secrets is, they don't just disappear. They fester. They rot from the inside out. And now, whatever secret James had been keeping was starting to seep into the cracks of our life. Later that afternoon, while James was asleep, I stepped into the hallway to call his office. I needed answers, even if he wasn't ready to give them to me. Bennett Logistics, this is Claire, the receptionist answered cheerfully. Hi, Claire. This is Olivia Bennett, James's wife. I just wanted to let you know he's in the hospital. I'm trying to understand what happened. Did anything unusual happen at work yesterday? There was a brief pause. Oh, Claire said slowly, her tone shifting. Yes, we heard. I'm so sorry. We were all really shocked when it happened. Shocked? Why? Well, it's just that James has seemed really stressed lately. More than usual. And yesterday, there was this situation. My heart rate picked up. What kind of situation? Claire hesitated. I don't know all the details, but there was a man who showed up at the office. He was upset. Caused a bit of a scene in the lobby. Security had to ask him to leave. I pressed the phone harder to my ear. Do you know who he was? I'm not sure, but I think James knew him. They argued. It was intense. After the guy left, James seemed shaken. Then later that afternoon, he collapsed. My hand trembled slightly as I hung up. The man. It wasn't just Lily's imagination. It was real. And James was lying to me. When I returned to his room, he was awake again, staring blankly out the window. James, I said quietly, closing the door behind me. He turned his head slowly, his face weary. I just got off the phone with your office, I said. Claire told me about the man who showed up yesterday. She said you argued. That security had to intervene. His face went pale. Who was he? I pressed. And what does he know about you that I don't? For a moment, I thought he was going to deny it again. But then something shifted. His shoulders slumped, his face crumpling with exhaustion and something else, defeat. I didn't want you to find out this way, he whispered. Find out what? My voice was barely more than a breath. James swallowed hard, his eyes glassy. It's not what you think, he said finally, his voice trembling. But I made a mistake. A big one. And now? I don't know how to fix it. I stared at him, my heart pounding. What kind of mistake, James? His lips parted, but before he could answer, Lily stirred from her chair, her small voice cutting through the thick tension. Is Daddy going to tell you about the lady too? She mumbled sleepily, rubbing her eyes. The room went dead silent. I turned slowly to face her. The lady? I repeated, my voice shaky. Lily nodded, yawning. The lady who came with the angry man. The one who said Daddy was her husband. I felt the floor drop out from under me. James's face turned ashen. And I realized. The truth wasn't just a secret. It was a bomb. And it had just gone off. For a few seconds, the room was filled with nothing but the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the sterile, faint hum of fluorescent lights, and the deafening roar inside my head. The lady who said Daddy was her husband. Lily's words hung in the air, innocent and matter-of-fact, oblivious to the depth of the wound they had just inflicted. I turned slowly to James. His face was drained of color, his mouth slightly open, but no words came out. His eyes, a pair of dark, hollow pools, couldn't meet mine. James, I whispered, my voice trembling, what is she talking about? Silence. I took a step closer to his hospital bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Answer me. James closed his eyes, exhaling shakily, like a man who'd just realized the fight was over. No more hiding. No more carefully constructed lies to shield us from the truth. There's someone else, he whispered. The words hit me like a slap. Sharp, sudden, disorienting. Someone else. I stumbled back a step, as if the distance between us could somehow lessen the blow. My mind scrambled to catch up, to make sense of what I'd just heard. What do you mean, someone else? I asked, my voice eerily calm, though I could feel myself unraveling inside. James swallowed hard, his gaze flickering briefly to Lily before shifting back to me. Her name is Rachel, he murmured. He stopped, struggling to find the words, his voice brittle. We've been involved. Involved. The word echoed in my mind, hollow and meaningless. Involved. Like it was a business partnership, a hobby, not the betrayal it truly was. For how long? I croaked, my throat tight, my fingers clenching into fists at my sides. James looked away, staring out the window like he couldn't bear to face me. 2 years. The room spun. 2 years. 2 years of dinners together, holidays, anniversaries, bedtime stories with Lily, lazy Sunday mornings, 2 years of living a life I thought was real while he was involved with someone else. And then it hit me, the realization so sharp it felt like it could slice through bone. Lily knew. She had seen things, heard things. The man. The woman. She hadn't made it up. She had been a witness to something my heart wasn't ready to face. I sank into the chair beside the bed, feeling like my legs might give out. "You've been cheating on me for 2 years," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it hadn't. James didn't respond. He didn't have to. Lily yawned beside me, oblivious to the emotional wreckage she had just unearthed. She climbed into my lap, snuggling against me, her small warmth both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. I swallowed back the lump in my throat and kissed the top of her head, the familiar scent of her shampoo grounding me just enough to keep me from falling apart. But I wasn't done. I turned to James again, my voice low and sharp. "Who was the man, James? The one who came to the house? The one Lily said was yelling at you?" James flinched slightly, guilt etched into every line of his face. "His name is Daniel," he murmured. "He's Rachel's husband." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Her husband?" I repeated, my voice hollow. James nodded slowly. "I didn't know at first. She told me she was separated. But it was a lie. Just like mine." The irony of it was almost laughable, if it didn't hurt so damn much. 2 liars tangled in a web of deceit, and somehow, I'd been caught in the middle without even knowing I was part of the game. "And what did he want?" I asked through gritted teeth. James sighed, his face crumpling with exhaustion. "To ruin me. To tell you everything. He's been following me, showing up at work, calling, threatening. He found out a few months ago, and he's been relentless." A few months ago. That's when James started acting strange. The late nights at work. The sudden stress. The distance. It all made sense now. Not that it made it any easier to accept. I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. "I'm taking Lily home," I said, my voice cold and detached, as if I could will myself into not feeling the rage, the heartbreak, the betrayal. James's eyes filled with panic. "Olivia, please. Don't." "Don't what?" I snapped. "Don't leave? Don't hate you? Don't destroy the fragile little world you've been juggling between me and your mistress?" His face twisted in pain, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I grabbed Lily's hand, guiding her gently toward the door. "Mommy," she whispered, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "We're going home." As I led her out of the hospital room, James's voice called after me, weak and desperate. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't look back. Because the truth was, I didn't recognize him anymore. And I wasn't sure I ever would again. When we got home, the house felt like a stranger. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture, every little detail of the life I thought I'd built with James, it all felt like a lie. I tucked Lily into bed, kissed her forehead, and sat in the dark for a long time, staring at nothing. Until my phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from an unknown number. "You deserve to know the whole truth. Call me." Attached was a photo. James. With a woman. Rachel, I assumed. But it wasn't just that. They weren't alone. There was a little boy. James was holding him like he'd done with Lily 1,000 times. Smiling like he belonged there. My blood turned to ice. Because suddenly, I realized. This wasn't just an affair. It was a double life. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred, my fingers trembling as they gripped the edges of the phone. The image was simple yet devastating. James, standing beside a woman I could only assume was Rachel, his arm wrapped around her waist like it belonged there. But it wasn't just the intimacy between them that shattered me. It was the boy. A small child with dark hair, big brown eyes that mirrored James's so perfectly it made me nauseous. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was from just 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, James had kissed me goodbye before leaving for what he claimed was a work trip. 2 weeks ago, he had FaceTimed with Lily, telling her he missed her and couldn't wait to come home. 2 weeks ago, I thought we were just a normal family, living an ordinary life. But none of it was real. I glanced at the message again. You deserve to know the whole truth. Call me. No name. No context. Just the image and the promise of answers I wasn't sure I was ready for. I sat there in the dark, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask, but couldn't stop from surfacing. Is that his son? How long has this been going on? How many lies has he told me? The phone felt heavy in my hand, like it held more than just the photo. It held the key to unraveling everything I thought I knew about my life. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up and walked into the kitchen, needing to move, to breathe, to do something other than drown in the suffocating silence. I poured a glass of water, my hands still shaking. I should have deleted the message. Ignored it. Pretended it didn't exist. But I couldn't. My thumb hovered over the screen, then pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, low and steady. Olivia? The sound of my name from a stranger's lips sent a chill down my spine. Who is this? I managed to whisper. A brief pause. My name is Daniel, the voice replied. Rachel's husband. The name hit me like a slap. Daniel, the man Lily mentioned, the one who had shown up at our house, the man James had been arguing with at work. The man whose life, like mine, had been upended by the same betrayal. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. What do you want? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. To tell you the truth, Daniel said quietly. The truth James won't. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. Why now? Because I thought confronting him would be enough. I thought he'd come clean, end it, face the consequences. But he didn't. He's still lying to you. He's still living 2 lives. And you deserve to know the truth. My legs felt weak. I slid down to the floor, my back against the cabinet, clutching the phone to my ear like a lifeline. Is that his son? I whispered, my throat tight. Another pause. Yes. The confirmation felt like a punch to the chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to stop the tears from falling, but it was useless. How long? 3 years, Daniel replied. Maybe longer. I found out 6 months ago. That's when everything fell apart. 3 years. Longer than James had admitted. Longer than I could have imagined. He told me it was just an affair, I whispered bitterly. A mistake. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. No. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over again. A life he built while pretending to be someone else with you. His words cut deep because they were true. I didn't realize I was crying until a soft voice interrupted my spiral. Mommy? I looked up to see Lily standing in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, her eyes filled with sleepy confusion and concern. I quickly wiped my face, forcing a shaky smile. Go back to bed, sweetheart. Mommy's just on the phone. She hesitated, then nodded, shuffling back to her room. When I put the phone back to my ear, Daniel was silent, waiting. I don't know what to do, I admitted quietly. I do, he replied. Meet me tomorrow. I'll show you everything. I hesitated. Meeting a stranger, him, felt reckless. But I needed answers, no matter how much they hurt. Okay, I whispered. Where? He gave me an address. A small cafe on the outskirts of town. Neutral ground. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring into nothing. Eventually, I got up, locked all the doors, checked on Lily, and crawled into bed alone. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the echoes of my own heartbeat, wondering how many lies a marriage could survive before it collapsed completely. And knowing, deep down, that I was already past that point. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I got Lily ready for school like nothing was wrong, forcing smiles, packing her lunch, kissing her goodbye like it wasn't the end of everything I knew. After she was gone, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She had dark circles under her eyes, a hollow look etched into her features, and a sadness that felt permanent. But there was something else too. Determination. I wasn't just going to be the woman left behind. The one James lied to. I was going to find out everything. And when I did, I was going to burn his perfect little double life to the ground. The cafe Daniel had chosen was tucked away on the outskirts of town, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. It sat quietly between an old gas station and a rundown laundromat, its chipped green awning fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. The sign above the door read The Corner Bean, though the faded letters suggested it had been there long enough to have seen better days. I parked my car across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if letting go would unravel me completely. The knots in my stomach tightened with every minute I sat there, staring at the door, wondering if I was making a mistake. What if this was a trap? What if Daniel wasn't who he said he was? What if? I shook the thoughts from my head. I wasn't here because of Daniel. I was here because of James. Because of the lies. Because of the photo. Because I needed the truth. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and forced myself out of the car. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as I stepped inside. The place was nearly empty, just an elderly couple sharing a pot of coffee in the corner and a barista wiping down the counter. And then there was Daniel. He was seated in a booth near the back, facing the door, as if he'd been waiting for me to walk in. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair, sharp features, and a jawline clenched tight enough to carve stone. There were faint shadows under his eyes, the kind that only came from sleepless nights and heavy regrets. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything hung between us, two strangers connected by the same betrayal. I walked over slowly, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. "Olivia," he asked, standing to greet me. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and slid into the booth opposite him. He sat back down, his fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped coffee mug. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I didn't need pleasantries. "Just tell me," I whispered. "Tell me everything." Daniel exhaled, his shoulders sinking slightly. He reached into his bag and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs. He slid it across the table toward me. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The first thing I saw was another photo of James, holding the little boy again, but this time at what looked like a birthday party. There were balloons, a cake, and Rachel standing beside them, her hand resting on James's chest like she belonged there. I flipped through more photos, James and Rachel at a park, James picking the boy up from what appeared to be daycare, James at a family barbecue, laughing like he didn't have another family waiting at home. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, the reality of his double life laid out in stark, undeniable evidence. "How long?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. 3 years, Daniel replied. "I found out 6 months ago." Rachel started acting distant, always on her phone, late nights at work. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't expect, he trailed off, shaking his head. I hired a private investigator. That's how I got all this. I swallowed hard, flipping to the next page, a copy of a birth certificate. The father's name, James Bennett. I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. He signed the birth certificate, I whispered, my voice hollow. Daniel nodded. He's not just having an affair, Olivia. He's living a second life. The words hit me like a freight train. Not just an affair. An entirely different life. With another woman. Another child. I closed the folder, my hands shaking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice brittle. I tried, Daniel said. I went to your house. I confronted James at his office. But he always managed to cover it up. He's good at lying, Olivia. Really good. I thought back to all the times James had looked me in the eye and told me he loved me. All the times he'd kissed Lily goodnight, tucked her in, made promises he had no intention of keeping. The rage bubbled up so quickly it made me dizzy. Does Rachel know you're here? I asked. Daniel shook his head. She doesn't know I reached out to you. She's just as good at pretending as he is. I stared down at the folder, my mind spinning. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, sympathy, maybe. Or understanding. You deserve the truth, he said quietly. And he deserves to face it. When I got home, the house felt colder somehow, emptier. I paced the living room for hours, the folder sitting on the coffee table like a loaded gun. Every time I looked at it, my heart twisted, but I couldn't bring myself to put it away. I thought about James, lying in that hospital bed, pretending to be the man I thought I married. I thought about Lily, her innocent face, her small voice asking questions she didn't even understand. And I thought about the boy. His son. Eventually, I picked up my phone and dialed James's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice weak but filled with relief. Olivia, he breathed. I've been trying to reach you. I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk? I need to explain. You don't need to explain anything, I interrupted, my voice cold and steady. I know everything. Silence on the other end. I met Daniel, I continued. I've seen the photos. The birth certificate. I know about your son, James. His sharp intake of breath was all the confirmation I needed. Olivia. I didn't let him finish. Save it, I snapped. You don't get to control this anymore. I'm done listening to your lies. I hung up, my hands shaking. But it wasn't fear this time. It was fury. And James had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last 10 years with James. Every I love you, every kiss goodbye, every whispered promise. It was like watching a movie I'd seen 1,000 times, except now, I could see all the flaws in the script, the cracks in the facade. By morning, my anger had solidified into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't going to be the woman who crumbled under the weight of betrayal. I wasn't going to be the wife who looked the other way, pretending everything was fine. James had built this house of lies brick by brick. Now I was going to tear it down. When I arrived at the hospital, I felt like I was walking into enemy territory. The sterile hallways, the faint antiseptic smell, it all felt suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. I found James in his room, propped up slightly in the hospital bed, his face pale but alert. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the weight of his lies had finally caught up with him. When he saw me, relief washed over his face. Olivia, he breathed, his voice weak. Thank God. I've been so worried. Don't, I snapped, cutting him off as I shut the door behind me. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have, final, like a judge's gavel. James's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. I know, I said, my voice cold, each word sharp enough to draw blood. I know about Rachel. I know about your son. I know everything. His face drained of what little color it had left. He opened his mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. I tossed the manila folder onto his lap. The photos spilled out like evidence in a courtroom, James laughing at a barbecue, holding his son, standing beside Rachel like he belonged there. Go ahead, I whispered. Explain this. James's hands trembled as he gathered the photos, flipping through them like he couldn't believe his secrets were laid out so plainly. Olivia, I can explain, he stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. Then start talking, I hissed, crossing my arms over my chest. Because the next words out of your mouth better be the truth, or I swear to God, I'll walk out that door and never look back. James swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked down at the photos, then back at me, his eyes filled with something that almost resembled regret, but not quite. It started 3 years ago, he began, his voice shaking. Rachel and I met through work. It was supposed to be nothing, just a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, my voice rising. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is leaving the oven on. You didn't trip and fall into an affair, James. You chose this. Over and over again. He flinched, but I didn't care. I tried to end it, he whispered, his eyes darting away. But then, she got pregnant. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. So, what? You decided to have 2 families instead? I snapped. Was it fun? Playing house with her while pretending to be a husband and father here? James buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen, he choked out. But it did happen, I shot back. And you lied. To me. To Lily. To everyone. At the mention of our daughter's name, James's face crumpled even more. I love Lily, he whispered. She's my daughter, nothing changes that. I took a step closer, my hands clenched into fists. Everything changes that, I hissed. You didn't just cheat on me, James. You betrayed our family. You let our daughter be part of your lie. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You did. I left the hospital without looking back. The weight of the confrontation settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and relentless. But beneath the pain, there was something else, something fierce and burning. Freedom. For the first time in months, I wasn't shackled by James's lies. I was done being the victim. It was time to take my life back. When I got home, Lily was in the living room, coloring quietly. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes bright and innocent. Hi, Mommy, she said softly. I forced a smile, even though my heart was breaking. Hi, sweetheart, I whispered, kneeling beside her. She studied me for a moment, then tilted her head. Did you see Daddy? She asked. I nodded. Is he coming home soon? I swallowed the lump in my throat and brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, baby, I whispered. Daddy's not coming home. Not for a while. She frowned, her little brow furrowing in confusion. Why? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Because sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. And when that happens, we have to figure out how to fix them. Lily nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she should. Is Daddy's mistake bigger than when I spilled juice on your laptop? She asked innocently. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Yeah, I whispered, pulling her into my arms. It's a lot bigger than that. I held her tightly, feeling her small heartbeat against mine. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. James might have broken our family. But he would never break me. The days after confronting James felt surreal, as if I were living in someone else's skin, going through the motions while my mind spun in a loop of disbelief and fury. Every corner of the house was a landmine, a photo of us smiling at Lily's 3rd birthday, his favorite mug in the kitchen, the scent of his cologne lingering faintly on the pillow he'd left behind. It wasn't just our marriage that had collapsed. It was the illusion of the life I thought I had. But grief has a strange way of mutating. Where sadness once resided, something else began to take root. Not just anger, purpose. James thought he could build 2 lives and keep them separate, like fragile glass towers standing side by side, pretending they'd never shatter. I was going to make sure they both came crashing down. I met with a divorce lawyer the next day. Her name was Claire Monroe, sharp as glass and twice as dangerous when she needed to be. She had this way of looking at you, like she already knew your story before you even opened your mouth. I laid everything out, the affair, the other family, the betrayal etched into every detail of our lives. She listened without interrupting, jotting down notes with quick, precise strokes of her pen. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. "He's in deep," she finally said. "And he's left you with leverage." I raised an eyebrow. "Leverage?" Claire nodded, tapping the pen against her notepad. "Most affairs are hard to prove, but in your case, there's documented evidence. Photos, the birth certificate, witnesses like Daniel. In court, that matters. It shows a pattern of deception, not just to you but potentially financial fraud if he's been supporting another household without disclosure. Depending on how his finances are tied to yours, we could have a case for more than just alimony." The legal jargon swirled around me, but one word stuck: fraud. James wasn't just a liar. He was potentially a criminal in the eyes of the court. "Can I take everything from him?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing beneath. Claire gave me a small, knowing smile. "If that's what you want, yes." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't, but because now it had somewhere to go. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, I sat at the dining room table with James's laptop. I'd avoided touching it until now, afraid of what I might find. But curiosity and rage are powerful motivators, and I needed to know everything. I wasn't just looking for closure. I was looking for ammunition. The laptop wasn't password protected. Of course, James hadn't bothered, his real secrets weren't hidden behind screens. They were hidden in plain sight, buried under years of routine and trust. But as I dug through his emails, my stomach turned. There were messages from Rachel. Hundreds of them. Some mundane, plans for picking up their son, grocery lists, reminders. But others were filled with the kind of intimacy that made my skin crawl. "I miss you already. Last night was perfect. I hate going back to the other life. When will you finally leave her?" I scrolled further, my heart pounding, until I found something that made me freeze. An email from James to Rachel, dated just a week before his collapse. Subject: "It's time. I can't keep this up, Rachel. Olivia is getting suspicious. I'll talk to her soon, figure out the best way to end things without causing too much damage. I just need more time. Trust me. Trust me." The audacity of those words, written while he was still coming home to me, kissing me goodnight, playing the role of the devoted husband. But it wasn't just the betrayal that caught my attention. It was the timeline. James hadn't collapsed from stress at work. He'd collapsed under the weight of his lies unraveling. Fueled by a fresh wave of rage, I picked up my phone and called Daniel. He answered on the first ring. "Olivia," he said, his voice low. "I've been waiting for your call." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I found something," I said. Emails between them. He was planning to leave me. Soon. I think Rachel knew. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. she always knew. She's good at playing innocent, but Rachel's been pulling the strings for a long time. James didn't have the spine to make a decision on his own. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. What do you mean? I asked. Daniel hesitated, then sighed. I mean, I don't think James was just going to leave you. I think they had a plan. Something bigger. A chill crept down my spine. What kind of plan? Meet me tomorrow, Daniel said. I'll show you. I met Daniel at a small park near the edge of town. It was quiet, the kind of place where secrets could be exchanged without prying eyes. He was already there when I arrived, pacing near a bench, his face tense. When he saw me, he didn't bother with small talk. He handed me a flash drive. What's this? I asked. Proof, he replied. Of how far they were willing to go. I didn't wait. I pulled out my laptop right there on the bench, my fingers trembling as I inserted the flash drive. Inside were files. Dozens of them, bank statements, hidden transactions, messages I hadn't seen before. But one document made my blood run cold. A life insurance policy. On me. James had taken out a substantial policy in my name just 6 months ago. The beneficiary? Rachel. I stared at the screen, my heart racing, a sickening realization sinking in. This wasn't just an affair. It was a setup. And if James hadn't collapsed that day, I might have been next. I couldn't breathe. The words on the screen blurred, swimming in front of my eyes like they were part of some sick nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A life insurance policy. In my name. With Rachel as the beneficiary. I stared at it, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. This wasn't about an affair, about secrets, or even James's double life. This was something darker. Something lethal. I felt Daniel's eyes on me, his jaw tight, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket as if he didn't know what to do with them. How long have you known about this? I managed to whisper, my voice barely holding steady. A couple of weeks, he replied quietly. I found it when I was digging through Rachel's files after she left the laptop open. I didn't know how to tell you. I wasn't even sure if it meant what I thought it did. But now you are, I finished for him, my voice sharp, filled with a rage I could barely contain. Because I knew it too. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. James had been planning something. They had been planning something. I shut the laptop with trembling hands, standing up abruptly, the bench creaking in protest. My body felt too small to contain the whirlwind of emotions threatening to burst out, fear, rage, betrayal, disbelief. They were going to kill me, I whispered, the words tasting foreign and bitter on my tongue. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't try to soften the blow. He just nodded slowly. That's what I think, he admitted. And I think James's collapse screwed up whatever plan they had. Maybe that's why Rachel's been acting so strange lately, like she's trying to figure out what to do next. I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling out of control. James. The man I'd built a life with. The father of my child. The person who'd once held my hand and promised me forever. Was he really capable of this? But the evidence was right there, cold, undeniable, impossible to ignore. When I got home, the house felt like a crime scene. Every photo on the walls, every piece of furniture, every echo of laughter and love, it was all tainted now. Lily was in her room, coloring quietly, humming to herself, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing, trying to piece together the fragments of my life that had been shattered beyond recognition. Then my phone rang. James. I stared at his name flashing on the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. Don't answer it, I told myself. But my thumb moved on its own, swiping across the screen. I didn't say anything. Olivia, his voice came through, weak and breathless. Thank God you picked up. I've been trying to reach you. I stayed silent, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. I know you're angry, he continued, his tone soft, the same tone he used to use when he'd come home late from work with a lame excuse. I deserve that. But please, we need to talk. I need to explain. I laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound. Explain? I finally said, my voice sharp as glass. What are you going to explain, James? The affair? The lies? Or the life insurance policy with Rachel as the beneficiary? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I can explain that, he stammered, panic creeping into his voice. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Don't bother, I whispered. I know everything. Olivia, please. It's not what you think. No? I snapped. Then what is it, James? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and your mistress were planning to get rid of me. And if you hadn't collapsed that day, I'd probably be dead right now. His breath hitched, like he was about to cry. But I didn't care. I'm done listening to your lies, I said coldly. We're done. And then I hung up. But it wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to find my front door slightly ajar. I froze, my heart racing. Had I left it open? No. I was sure I'd locked it the night before. I grabbed the baseball bat from the hall closet, the one James used to keep for protection, and crept through the house, checking every room. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. Except for one thing. A single photo from the living room wall had been taken down. It was a picture of me and Lily, taken on her 5th birthday. And written across it in red ink were the words, "You don't know everything." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about James anymore. Rachel was here. Watching us. And whatever she wanted. She wasn't done. I stared at the photo in my trembling hands, the words "You don't know everything" scrawled across my face in bold red ink. It wasn't just a message, it was a warning. She'd been in my house. Rachel had crossed the invisible line that separated my nightmare from reality. And now, this wasn't just about betrayal or infidelity. It was about survival. I checked every lock, every window, every shadow in every corner of the house. But no matter how many times I circled through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, lurking just beyond my line of sight. Lily was still asleep in her room, her small, peaceful breaths oblivious to the storm brewing outside her door. I stood in her doorway for a long time, just watching her, trying to gather the courage to face what was coming next. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Not when my daughter's life was in the crosshairs. I called Daniel. The minute he picked up, I didn't waste time with greetings. She was here, I whispered. Rachel. She broke into my house. Silence on the other end, then his sharp intake of breath. What did she do? He asked quietly. She left a message. I stared down at the photo again, my stomach twisting. She's not done. Daniel didn't hesitate. Pack a bag. You and Lily need to get out of there. Now. But something inside me snapped. I was tired of running. Tired of reacting. No, I said firmly. I'm done hiding. It's time to end this. Daniel was quiet for a beat, then sighed. What do you have in mind? And that's when the plan began to form. Later that day, I went to the hospital. James was sitting up in bed, looking worse than the last time I'd seen him, his face hollow, his skin pale, shadows under his eyes like bruises. When he saw me, his expression flickered with something between hope and dread. Olivia, he breathed, his voice raspy. Thank God you're here. I've been trying to. Save it, I snapped, slamming the manila folder onto the small table beside his bed. The folder containing everything, photos, emails, bank statements, and now the photo Rachel had left in my house. His eyes darted to the photo, and his face drained of what little color remained. "She was in my house, James," I hissed. "She left this." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just that familiar, pathetic look of guilt and fear. "Why?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "Why would she do this? What does she want?" James swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "She's not who you think she is," he whispered finally. "Oh, really?" I snapped, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because I thought she was your mistress. The mother of your son. The woman you planned to build a life with after you got rid of me." James flinched like I'd slapped him. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "I never wanted you to get hurt." "Too late for that," I spat. Then I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "I know about the life insurance policy, James." His eyes widened with panic. I can explain." "Don't bother." I stood up straight, gripping the folder tightly. "I'm done listening to your lies. The next time we see each other, it'll be in court." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. "She's dangerous, Olivia," he whispered. "You don't know what she's capable of." I glanced back over my shoulder, my heart pounding. Neither does she. The plan was simple. I needed Rachel to think she'd won. I needed her to feel untouchable. So I played the part of the broken, desperate wife. I posted a cryptic message online, one I knew she'd see. "I can't do this anymore. You win." Then I waited. It didn't take long. Late that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me. Alone. Or next time it won't just be a photo." The address was an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Of course. Where else would a psychopath choose for a final showdown? I showed the message to Daniel. "We'll set a trap," he said. "I've got a friend on the force. We'll get her." But something inside me, something fierce and primal, knew this was something I had to finish myself. So I left my phone behind. I didn't want anyone stopping me. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp outside. The air smelled of rust and decay, every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet echoing like gunshots. She was waiting for me. Rachel. She stepped out of the shadows, her face twisted with something between triumph and madness. "You're braver than I thought," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "What do you want?" I demanded. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I want what's mine," she hissed. "James. The life you stole from me." I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound. "He was never yours," I spat. "Just like he was never really mine. He's a coward. And you're worse." Her smile faded, replaced by a flicker of rage. "You should have just disappeared," she snarled. "But you had to make it complicated." She pulled out a small knife, its blade catching the faint light. I didn't flinch. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. "I'm not the one who's complicated things," I whispered, stepping closer. "You did." She lunged. But I was ready. I sidestepped, grabbing the pipe I'd hidden behind my back, swinging with every ounce of fury inside me. The blow connected with a sickening crack, and Rachel crumpled to the floor, the knife skittering across the ground. Sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel had called the cops after all. Good. Because when they arrived, they didn't find a victim. They found a survivor. The blare of sirens grew louder, their wailing echo bouncing off the crumbling walls of the warehouse as if the building itself was screaming. I stood over Rachel's crumpled body, my chest heaving, my knuckles white around the blood-streaked pipe I'd used to stop her. She wasn't dead, just unconscious. But the sight of her lying there, broken and vulnerable, felt like poetic justice. This was the woman who'd slithered into my life like a shadow, weaving her lies around James and, by extension, around me. She'd smiled in photos with her child, the child she'd had with my husband, while plotting to erase me from existence. And now here she was. Defeated. But there was no victory in this. Only the hollow aftermath of surviving something that should have never happened. The police arrived within minutes. Daniel was right behind them, his face tense with worry until he saw me standing there, blood smeared on my hands but otherwise intact. I dropped the pipe with a loud clang, my fingers numb. The officers swarmed in, cuffing Rachel's limp wrists as they checked her pulse. She groaned softly, her eyelids fluttering, but I didn't care. I'd already won the battle that mattered, I was alive. As they led me outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap, bringing with it the full weight of everything I'd endured. Daniel was there, his face etched with relief and something else, regret, maybe. "You're okay," he whispered, his hand hovering near my shoulder like he wanted to comfort me but wasn't sure if I'd shatter under his touch. I wasn't okay. I wasn't even close. But I was breathing. And that was enough. The days that followed felt like fragments of someone else's life. Rachel was charged with attempted murder, breaking and entering, and conspiracy. The police uncovered more evidence, her fingerprints on the photo she'd left in my house, emails between her and James detailing their plan to make me disappear, and financial records that showed how deep their deception went. James tried to reach out from the hospital. Calls. Letters. Even a voicemail that I deleted without listening to. He wasn't worth my time. He'd carved out his place in hell, and I had no intention of visiting. The divorce was swift, thanks to Claire Monroe's ruthless efficiency. James lost everything, our house, joint accounts, even visitation rights with Lily, though he barely fought for that. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to salvage. Or maybe he just didn't care enough. Either way, he was out of our lives. One evening, months later, I stood in the doorway of Lily's room, watching her sleep. Her small chest rose and fell in the soft glow of her nightlight, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. She didn't ask about James anymore. She didn't have to. She'd seen enough. I walked outside, the cool breeze brushing against my skin like a reminder that I was still here, still standing. The weight of the past hadn't crushed me, it had forged me into something stronger. Daniel eventually moved away, trying to rebuild his life in another city. We kept in touch, though not often. There was too much history between us, too many ghosts lingering in the spaces where words used to be. But sometimes, when the house was quiet and the memories crept in like shadows, I'd think of him, not as the man whose wife tried to destroy me, but as the person who helped me survive. Life moved on. It always does. But I carried the scars, invisible to everyone but me. They were reminders, not of weakness, but of resilience. Of the battles I fought. Of the wars I won. Because in the end, survival isn't about coming out unscathed. It's about standing in the wreckage of your past. And realizing you're still here.